It's the first branch I've gone to where I had a nice soft seat. There's a carpet. I'm glad it's not the red carpet. But it's good to be here. I was a teacher at this school a long, long time ago, and that's a little known fact. But you know, there's been a lot of development here. And you know, I'm proud of my 2 years having served hard time in the education system. I believe if Jerome Fitzgerald was the Minister of Education back then, I may have stayed. And I want you to know that Mr. Fitzgerald is a one-of-a-kind kind of member of parliament.
Yes!
And I believe you are very fortunate to have had him as your MP for Marathon.
Oh yes, 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 yes.
He was always very prepared, always very responsive. He understood that his role was to serve the people.
That's right.
And he's missed by the Ministry of Education. So I want you to give Jerome Kennedy Fitzgerald a round of applause for having us. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. This is my first time speaking publicly since Hurricane Dorian. And yes, I do have a lot to say. It's gonna be maybe about 25, 30 minutes. So I invite you to relax. I see you have soft seats as well. Hurricane Dorian has wreaked death and devastation on our nation, bringing immeasurable tragedy to Abaco and Grand Bahama. I've been quiet because I understood then, as I do now, that the Bahamian people want action, not just talk. I understood then, as I do now, that whilst we hold the government to account, we must allow them to do what they were elected to do, which is to govern. I have seen the destruction firsthand on those islands, heartbreaking and gut-wrenching as it is. We mobilized the organs of our party in the run-up to the storm and monitored the developments closely. We watched with horror at the carnage it wrought on Abaco, leveling Marsh Harbor, Dundas Town, and Murphytown and other communities, killing scores with hundreds missing and tens of thousands displaced. The horror continued as the storm hit Grand Bahama and lingered and lingered. It flooded the eastern end of the island, sweeping away lives and lifetime of work and investments. When the all clear was given, we were ready to go. Shipping supplies by boat, surveying the areas by air. We chartered flights and organized our people on the ground and went to communities on both islands with aid and to let them know they were not alone. Our leader led the delegation. He's a man with a big heart, and I bring greetings tonight on his behalf. We offered our service to the country by offering our unwavering support for the government and expressed the desire to aid through official channels in the aftermath, though there was little reply. We put partisanship aside because we seek to have a united nation. We understood that a catastrophe of this magnitude calls for all hands on deck. However, we, like you, recount stories of frustration as basic services and needed supplies in the aftermath were lacking. As we offered our help and distributed aid and assist with our limited resources, I remained uncritical as the government unnecessarily complicated the evacuation of Abaco. We were unnerved as we went into and throughout Grand Bahama and Abaco to learn that we were the first people arriving, bringing aid in some of these communities. We were aghast when we went to Equinor storage facility at South Riding Point to see a massive oil spill that no one from the company or the government appeared to be monitoring or assessing. We could see deep pools of oil seeping into the limestone, though we did not see the one goat and the 3 birds. I believe it was your MP for Marathon in second. Look where you get when you're tired of what you got. We released a video urging action, but we remained uncritical. We remained non-political. As NEMA lumbered ineffectively, as former prime ministers criticized the response to disaster, we remain uncritical, we remain unpolitical. In Exuma, Team Cooper and the people of Exuma mobilized in the aftermath, finding all the housing we could scrape up. We housed more than 100 adults and more than 60 children. We bought school uniforms for all of the children. We held a resume preparation workshop and a job fair. We successfully found more than 50 jobs that day. We did what Exumians do. We rose to the occasion. The Exuma Cares Committee did likewise in providing support and relief supplies. As things unfolded, we were working. As the Prime Minister appointed the Disaster Relief and Recovery Committee, we made no remark. We maintained that the country was facing the worst tragedy in living memory, and our energy could be better used helping in whatever way we could. We noted that the Prime Minister then added a NEMA spokesperson, a former permanent secretary in the Ministry of National Security, even though the NEMA director was the one who should be speaking. We noted that in addition to the Disaster Recovery Committee, the Prime Minister then added a former director of NIB, closely connected to the last F&M administration, and this one, a controversial figure, to head the relief and recovery efforts on Abaco. This despite the fact that there were already 2 MPs for Abaco who come under the cabinet's purview. The MP for North Abaco, he is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the member of Parliament for Central and South Abaco, who is already a parliamentary secretary in the office of the Prime Minister. We watched as the Prime Minister then appointed, beyond all sound reason, the President of the Senate, a polarizing personality, as the Relief and Recovery Director for the island of Grand Bahama. This despite that island having 5 MPs, 4 of whom now fall under the cabinet, 1 of whom is the Minister for Grand Bahama in the office of the Prime Minister on Grand Bahama, and 1, the Deputy Prime Minister, no less. We watched as the Prime Minister lashed out at the 2 former Prime Ministers who offered their assistance in the aftermath of the hurricane, all the while saying there was no time for politics. And we agree. The aftermath of the storm is no time for politics. I traveled with the PM to represent our leader and was criticized in a whisper campaign by the militant wing of our party. I did what was right, and I would do so again, given the same set of circumstances. And though I will still support the Prime Minister's efforts where they make sense and benefit the country, I wonder if he sees the irony in his position now. Now we have no time for politics, says the Prime Minister and his many mouthpieces. However, in the aftermath of Hurricane Matthew, I remind you, when the now Prime Minister was leader of the opposition and the PLP was in power, it seemed like there was time for politics then. But perhaps I'm wrong. Not 2 weeks after Hurricane Matthew hit, our now Prime Minister then said the Christie administration dropped the ball in dealing with the storm. Maybe he would say that wasn't political. He said the precautionary methods to deal with the storm were not taken. To quote him, he said, quote, government knew that a storm was coming. How can you afterward be asking for trucks, volunteers, etc.? All of that should have been done in advance, end quote. Perhaps he would say now that he wasn't being political. But I want to remind the Prime Minister that when he was leader of the opposition in 2016, he said, and I quote, you knew the storm was coming. You knew the strength of the storm. You knew the potential damage. You knew what was going to happen to the South. And therefore, they should have had already trucks, chainsaws, garbage bins, dumpsters, all lined up to deal with the aftermath appropriately. Not my words, those are the words of the now Prime Minister. As I quoted, perhaps he wasn't being political. The then opposition leader, now our Prime Minister, said in 2016 that the Christie administration was not aggressive enough getting people out of the path of the storm. He said that, not me. Perhaps he thought he wasn't being political then. Back in 2016, the then opposition leader said if the FNM won the government, it would implement mandatory evacuation legislation. Well, I've been a member of the House of Assembly now since May 2017, and I've yet to see any mandatory evacuation legislation tabled.
My Lord.
But perhaps none of that was political. So if all of that he said when he was opposition leader was not political, and legitimate criticism then, he should not shy away from answering those same concerns now.
My Lord.
This government knew Hurricane Dorian was coming.
And its strength.
We all watched it form, unmoved. The government was briefed on it. The opposition demanded to be briefed on it. The world saw it coming. Where was the mandatory evacuation legislation that was promised in 2016? And in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma in 2017, when he was Prime Minister? Where were the trucks, chainsaws, garbage bins, dumpsters, all lined up to deal with the aftermath appropriately? Where were they? In fact, where were the Defense Force ships? Where was the enforcement of the building codes as was promised when he was Prime Minister in the aftermath of Irma in 2017? If these issues were not political then surely they could not be political now. Perhaps amongst the many lessons this storm will teach the Bahamas and this Prime Minister is to be more circumspect with his words. Hopefully, this will make him a better leader, one who resists lunging at low-hanging political fruit in the days following a tragedy, just perhaps. But given the past several years, I remain skeptical about his ability to change. I remain concerned about his ability to govern. Let me explain to you what happened in the last 2.5 years. This Prime Minister, instead of growing the economy in a meaningful way, instead of following through on mandatory evacuation legislation as he promised, and strengthening the building codes, he has been playing politics the entire time he's been in office. Instead of ensuring that NEMA had all the things he said it needed, instead of over the last 2 years making sure that the government had all the things he said it needed, when he was in opposition, he has spent his time consistently in campaign mode. He has spent his time trying and so far failing to persecute the PLP. He has spent his time raising taxes and watching BPL fail. He has spent his time flying to and fro, calling the Bahamian people corrupt, after lambasting foreign travel under the last administration. Instead of going on a promotional tour for his VAT increase and campaigning on the public's dime, he should have been hard at work. But he was not. And here we are. Now that the Bahamas is in a most precarious position, and there is a literal mountain of work to be done, perhaps it is finally time that the Prime Minister put the politics behind it. But I'll tell you this, he's starting off on the wrong foot. If you've been keeping track, we have NEMA, which operates out of the Office of the Prime Minister. We have the Disaster Relief and Reconstruction Committee, which is co-chaired by a respected private sector professional and a prominent official in the Office of the Prime Minister. This committee may or may not be working. We haven't heard anything from them since. We have the new NEMA spokesperson, a former permanent secretary, who has now gone silent as NEMA has stopped talking to us. We have the new separate politically appointed coordinator for ABACO, the same ABACO that has 2 MPs again, a parliamentary secretary and a cabinet minister amongst them. We have the new separate coordinator for Grand Bahama, which is an island that has 5 F&M MPs. Again, 3, now 4 cabinet ministers, a deputy prime minister and a parliamentary secretary amongst them. And now we have a new Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction.
My Lord.
This is, and of itself, a purely political act, and one that we oppose. It is now a politician who heads this ministry, which will also operate out of the office of the Prime Minister. Let me be very clear. We have no beef with Hiram Lewis, and we wish him every success. However, what the Prime Minister should have done was to restructure NEMA, extend its powers, put highly skilled, competent, energetic people in charge. The Prime Minister says he wishes to end the red tape to reduce the bureaucracy, but he has done the exact opposite. In the PLP's view, it is a fair question to ask what the organization structure of this new ministry will be. What will be its budget? What role will NEMA play? Will there be a new permanent secretary, as there must? What will be the structure of the authority that is supposed to be set up within it? What role will the Disaster Relief and Reconstruction Committee play? Will NEMA report to the minister, who will then report to the Prime Minister? What about the 2 political appointees? Is this not the very definition of red tape? I want the Prime Minister to know that the Progressive Liberal Party stands ready to support him in any effort that will help to move the Bahamas back along the path to restoration. We are a progressive party, but we will not support confusion.
That's right.
What we see is the glaring lack of a clearly defined plan. We see knee-jerk responses by the administration that appears overwhelmed by the task before it. Meantime, as the government expands, there are lines hours long in Grand Bahama. As the people say, drinking water and potable water remains difficult to secure 1 month after the storm. Bahamians have had homes destroyed or gutted, businesses wiped out, and people have been displaced. There are still over 1,000 people in shelters. Nearly 600 people are still missing. Many children who are living in shelters are still not in school. Moores Island remains neglected, not visited by the government. What we would like to see is some sort of sense that a considered approach is being taken, and that there will emerge some method to this madness. And I believe my concern about what is unfolding is completely justified. You see, I represent Ragged Island. And for over 2 years, I have been agitating for this government to address the concerns of the people of Ragged Island, and to no avail. We have gotten minimal assistance, and we've gotten a lot of big promises that have yet to come to fruition. The people of Ragged Island have determined that they will believe what they see, and they will believe nothing that this Prime Minister said.
My Lord.
We are still awaiting government buildings and proper infrastructure. We are still awaiting the promised solarization of the island. They say that it will now happen before the end of the year, but they didn't say which year. 2 years later, and the government continued to fail Ragged Island. Still no school, no police, no nurse, and no sense of normalcy.
Wow.
Still, the minister says today the government is preparing a plan. Well, if it takes 2 years plus for the government to even approve a plan for an island with a population of less than 100,
Oh my.
then I think it's fair game to be very concerned about how long it will take for a plan to restore an island with more than 20,000 people.
My Lord.
You know, I say all this tonight to tell you that we cannot let serious questions go unanswered. We cannot let serious concerns go unaddressed because we do not want to seem political. But I tell you, this is the first of many addresses that I will do in the next week or two. We must continue to tell the stories of pain, heartbreak, and heroism. Yes, the government is facing an unprecedented tragedy. Yes, only 4 weeks have elapsed. However, that has been enough time for them to form a ministry. No proper offices for the ministry, no website for the ministry, no one in government seemed to know what the ministry will be doing or when or from where. No laws passed to change the statutory powers of NEMA. And mind you, NEMA had those statutory powers to break bureaucracy so that they could respond quickly during a time of disaster. And now it must go to the minister and maybe one of these super cronies. Maybe it must go to the Reconstruction Committee and then the minister. And maybe it then goes back to the Prime Minister, defeats the purpose of the structure of NEMA. But we will continue to tell the stories. 4 weeks should have been enough time to form a proper plan. For instance, since it's surveying the government's short-term economic plan for Grand Bahama and Abaco, there are things that make good sense, such as a special recovery zone. But there are things that don't make sense, as you would expect. In declaring East Grand Bahama only as an economic recovery zone, the government is making a tragic mistake. While East Grand Bahama was severely impacted, from what I am told, more than 2/3 of the homes and businesses on Grand Bahama sustained damage from the storm. The entire island, not just East Grand Bahama. Most people on the island lost vehicles well outside of East Grand Bahama. Freeport is the island's economic engine. It needs restarting. Downtown Freeport was badly flooded, with many businesses losing all their inventory, still suffering mold infestation, and they remain without power in many areas today, 4 weeks later. Even with the government promising $10 million in government loan guarantee, a sum that the government will shortly realize is far too low, Most people won't be able to access that capital in a timely manner or access enough to adequately rebuild and resupply, simply because the level of bureaucracy is simply too great. Yes, these people can take advantage of the exigency order, but the order is only good for 90 days. The economic zone is in effect for 3 years. Living in Freeport proper, though, does not automatically mean that you can import goods duty-free. Also, Grand Bahama and Abaco should be made VAT-free zones for the next 3 years. This would aid in the rebuilding and incentivize people to move back to those islands. We also urge the government to ensure that Ragged Island has access to these same incentives. We have also not heard any word on what is being done about the Grand Bahama International Airport, destroyed by Dorian. How is the economy of Grand Bahama to be rebuilt without an airport? How is tourism supposed to return in the form of stopover visitors now that the U.S. pre-clearance facility on the island has been completely destroyed? Where is the plan? The government's approach to public service payouts also seem inadequate. There perhaps should be a sensible loan program for civil servants impacted by the storm. The government, being the employer, mitigates any risk, and the money can be recovered simply by salary deduction. There needs to be more doing on the part of the government. This is a time for action. So we go back to Parliament on Wednesday, and we understand that the agenda is that the Prime Minister will deliver an extensive communication on Hurricane Dorian. This is a time for action. The government will have to decide if political promises and clinging on to the non-effective fiscal responsibility legislation will handcuff it from putting in what it will take to make all of this restoration and renewal happen. We can spend the money getting help and incentivizing businesses to rebuild and hire. That's what we must do. We can urge those who have legal status, I repeat, legal status, to move to Abaco to take part in the recovery and rebuilding effort. That's right. It is the PLP's policy that you should have legal status if you want to live and work in the Bahamas. And we do not see any reason to distinguish or discriminate based on nationality either. The same law must apply to all. And it's not xenophobia to ask that people come into your country the legal way. There is a legal way. Thank you. It's not xenophobia to ask that they abide by the laws of the country while they are here. That's right. That's right. And there is no way that we can ever allow any shanty towns to continue to exist in our country. They are simply not humane. They are simply not fit for humans to live and be socialized. And for far too long, we've allowed our immigrant brothers and sisters to live in such wretched conditions. And this must end. As must this blatant disregard for the laws of our country. There are thousands of young, able-bodied Bahamian men and women and people with status looking for work who still continue to look. They must be given opportunities to rebuild Abaco and Grand Bahama. They must be first considered for jobs that will arise in the recovery and the rebuilding effort. There are a myriad of issues that have risen out of this tragedy. And I don't have time to discuss in detail all of them tonight. But I believe Madam Chair will invite me back. There's immigration, there's the national budget, there's tax, there's national security concerns, there's the environment, and there's housing, to name a few. How do we rebuild the energy grid? Do we rebuild the power station at Wilson City, or do we rebuild small power plants to focus on the areas that can recover quickly? These are issues that we must tackle and discuss. How we provide reliable energy to the thousands who moved to the Providence when we couldn't do so before. How do we provide reliable energy to the people of Exuma when we've sent an engine to Abaco when we couldn't provide reliable energy before? Despite the enormity of the challenge, the PLP cannot give carte blanche to this government in the aftermath of all of this. Too much has gone awry in the last 2.5 years to simply sit back and really remain silent when things continue to go awry now. Ragged Islanders have lost faith in the government, as I understand much of the Bahamas has. They only now believe what they see and not what they hear. But we will pray for our Bahama land. We will pray for Abaco. We'll pray for Grand Bahama. And we'll pray for Ragged Island. We'll pray for the Prime Minister too. And the government to be able to help those in need and to bring order and recovery. But we will not be silenced under a guise of national political unity that the Prime Minister himself failed to subscribe to. In the coming days and weeks, you will hear more from me and the PLP about what plans the government has put forward. But remember, if it was not meant to be political then it should not be seen as political now. There are lessons we have learned from this disaster. We hope the government is learning them too. And we hope the government and its many defenders are now overly